A huge part of college football is great rivalries, and the Auburn Legends have plenty to say about that.
Before we let this 72 Alabama game go, we didn't get the perspective from two other people. One's a guy that scored the touchdowns, David. What's going through your mind on this call?
Well, the flashbacks that Coach Doug was talking about earlier, when you sit in here and think about what's going on, one flashback is, I believe Pat Dye had an Alabama coaching staff shirt on, didn't you? Weren't you coaching in Alabama?
Yeah.
You were coaching in Alabama. And the biggest memory I have of it, for me personally, I think I don't know, the score was, Alabama missed a field goal at some point in the game. And then they were down on the 4-yard line or 3-yard line and was fixing to score another touchdown. And there was a penalty, a legal procedure penalty against Wayne Wheeler was a wideout. Is that right, Coach?
Yeah.
Wayne Wheeler was a wideout, and Wayne and I were talking about his mom, and he stood up to say something to me, and he got an illegal procedure penalty, and they moved it back, and they kicked a field goal instead of going for the touchdown. So that was my biggest play of the game. But
you care to tell us what you were talking about?
His mom.
Good things about his mom.
Yeah. Yeah. She was an unusual mom. Yeah.
That's what Coach Jordan called the common vernacular.
But it was, and the guys, and I know what Bill means when he talks about when you say something about that game. You know, Bill and I have gotten an awful lot of publicity about that game and everything, and of course Bill will be the first to tell you I didn't do anything but pick up the ball and run down the field, but there were so many people involved in that game that made it special, and the block punts were certainly a highlight of the game, and that's why I'm probably sitting here.
Mitchell and Langner on the line of scrimmage coming from either side to try to block the kick. Auburn trying to go after it. Here's a snap. They got it. Block kick. Ball's back to the 25. Picked up on the bounce at the 25-yard line. And in for a touchdown is David Langner. Mitchell on the left, and Auburn is again going after the kick, as you might imagine. Greg Gant standing on his own 30. Auburn will try to block it. Auburn going after it. Here's a good snap. It is blocked. It is blocked. It's caught on the run. It's caught on the run. He's going to score. David Langner. David Langner has scored, and Auburn is tied the game.
You know, somebody that would remember something for 35 years had to be a hell of a play. You know what I mean? And to do it twice in a row, and of course Bill and Bob and there was 2 balls. I got both balls, by the way. I never would give Newton one because I swore that Roger Mitchell blocked the first one. And that's what the announcer said on the loudspeaker at the game, that Roger Mitchell, they announced.
I tried to convince David that I should have one of them. He said, well, you didn't block but one punt. I said, well, I did. I blocked both of them. He would never give me a ball, so he took both of them off.
Well, I done give Thorne one of them, so I didn't have but one left. And he wanted me to give him mine, and that didn't work, so. But, you know, so that was a real special game, but it was a real special bunch of people that, you know, Henley and him didn't do nothing in the game, but defense was really good, though. But you know, we give them the ball early in the game on the 19-yard line, and they can't even kick a field goal from there, right?
We won 10 ball games. They only blocked 2 kicks in one game. You know what I mean? But yeah, we didn't do nothing. You know, the Alabama people tell us, say, when are y'all going to stop talking about those block kicks? You know what I tell them? When y'all quit singing about the Rose Bowl.
Coach, you were on the other side of the field then. What was your perspective when all that was going on?
The mindset, the first one kind of came as a surprise. The next time we punted, everybody over there on the sideline thought they was fixing to block another one. Thought all was fixing to block it. Coach Bryant, I don't know, whether you could even tell, not begin, moved up 2 steps or 3 steps.
I don't think
to the line of scrimmage.
He might have been. That was enabled to him get it off quicker, though.
Well, get it off quicker plus change the angle.
Yeah.
See, but the angle you was coming at, I mean, it would have changed the angle coming from the outside, but coming up the middle, like, you know, inside. But
who missed the block on the Alabama team?
You know, a lot of folks says Hannah. I think it was Greg Montgomery.
Well, you know, when I want to really brag, I say Hannah, but I don't do it personally to him because but no, it was between Montgomery and Sprayberry, I believe. It was their left side.
Yeah, Montgomery was a freshman. It's probably him.
Hannah got a lot of
well, I mean, you know, a freshman probably make a mistake like that.
But one thing that, as a personal achievement there, I know it's nothing like the 23 rushes and 24 yards Terry got in that game. But, you know, I got it. Not used to the honors of a lineman getting any honors, but I was named National Lineman of the Week for that play. But the 2 punts were really what people remember me for in that game, and David for running them in. But what I'm most proud of is the fact that I read an article that Coach Davis and Coach Jordan for after the game, and he called it basically a flawless game for a linebacker to play, and gave me a lot of credit for playing. I graded out like 85%, but I made something like 21 or 23 tackles, individual tackles that game. That in itself is probably what I feel like was a greater achievement than blocking the 2 punts.
Playing for
and
that house.
Holding Alabama.
Was that legal back then, Coach?
One thing about the 72 team that made the 72 team, and that was all the people that were on the 71 team. You know, Pat and Terry and Dick Smocks and Alvin Bressler and Ronnie Ross and the Spigner boys. You know, Tommy Yearout. We had so many leaders in 71, and, you know, Coach Dye talked about that when he came to Auburn, that, you know, you got to build that and make that, and Pat and them had us there, Terry and Pat and people, and Ronnie Ross, I think, was a captain that year. Those people made us understand how to win. And we were dumb enough to think we were good in 72. You know, we didn't know that we were bad, and when we went into the year, you know, that's why we were able to play like we did.
Let's go back to that if we can. Pat, when your freshman class came in, and we'll start at the end of that freshman season and then let you kind of give the narrative. There's so many memorable games, but freshmen weren't eligible then, and that freshman game in Tuscaloosa is one of the memorable games that, 2,500 people were there, and at least 65,000 swear they saw it. Tell us about that.
You're right, but you know, I think the thing, and let me say, it wasn't me or Terry, it was all of us, and you know, I've always said that, and you know, the thing about that, when I went to Auburn, you know, Auburn hadn't won a freshman game in 6 or 7 years against Alabama, and then varsity hadn't won in, 5 or 6, Mike? And, you know, like Kenny said, everybody that was on the other side, you had played with high school or knew them or been recruited, and, you know, it's like brother. And first place, anywhere you went in the state of Alabama, you go into a convenience store, and they knew you played football. They want to know how you were going to do against Alabama, or vice versa. So, I mean, it was a constant year-round thing as it is now. So we started off our freshmen, and we, you know, make a long story short, they had a great team, and Johnny Musso and, you know, a bunch of players, and they get up 27-0. And, you know, this was in the middle of the second quarter, and we were able to score 15 right before half, and we got back in it. But I think there was a determination that, you know, it was just a will. We were not going to be denied. And, you know, it was something that, you know, we as a group talked about when we came on campus before we started fall practice, that, you know, we were going to somehow turn that around. And but anyway, we came back and won that ball game 33-27. And, of course, Terry had a great game. And Jerry Colley, who lives in Auburn now, was a tight end and caught a touchdown pass, I believe. And Spencer McCracken, you know, just on and on. I mean, Bill McManus, and, you know, on and on. But I think that, Coach talked about, you know, learning how to win. I think our football team drew on that. And going into the Alabama game the next year with Mike and Buddy there, you know, our group, and you know, we were down. Alabama started off, you know, I think they jumped up 10-0, and, you know, we were a better football team than they were that year. And then, you know, we came back, and talking with David Housel last night, one of the, you know, the great things that helped turn that game around was, it wasn't Connie Frederick's touchdown run when he you know, faked the punt. Is he caught a pass right before half, that we were able to go in and score and made a drive. And I won't ever forget that drive. It was just something that we drew on. And then, of course, Buddy intercepted one or two in the second half. But I won't ever forget Mike. And, you know, Mike Colon is one of the finest human beings in this world. And we all know it that's been around him and the way he lived his life. But I won't ever forget Mike at halftime of that game. You know, he was our captain. And, you know, he called everybody up. We were going out after Coach Jordan said a few words. And he said, man, we're going out there and beat the hell out of them. And for Mike Colon to say something like that, I mean, you know, you just tore the door down. And so I won't ever forget that.
Now, you guys had the great offense on that freshman team. And Mike, you and Buddy, y'all already had a lot of real good defensive players. That anticipation of that '69 year was pretty special around Auburn. There was a lot of build-up, Mike.
Well, there was, and Buddy and I were discussing it on the way up. And toward the latter part of the season, we really felt like we had great momentum and just felt very confident that we were going to beat our opponent. And so that was true against Georgia. I think they started out with, we roughed the punter 2 or 3 times the first series, but still stopped them defensively and won that game. And then going into Alabama, we felt real good about it. It was, you know, like Pat had said, I guess Auburn hadn't beaten Alabama in 5 or 6 years. And so, you know, we'd had 3 losses, one as a freshman, Buddy, and then sophomore and junior season. And we needed something to turn things around. And I had the privilege of being a co-captain the year before with Lauren Carter. And I remember walking out on the field, and Coach Bryant allowed all his seniors, Coach Dye, you remember this, to go out on the field with the 2 lead captains. And it was kind of intimidating for old Lauren, you know, skinny-legged kid, and I was the same way. And walking out on the field and seeing 20 guys facing you right there, looking you right in the eye, and it was just the 2 of us. And so the next year, I recall that experience and asked Coach Jordan if, in fact, our seniors could go out on the field, all of us walk out on the field for the coin toss. And you guys know Coach Jordan, he was slow to move and slow to change in terms of, you know, just, you know, changing his schedule and his way of doing things. But he said, well, that sounds fine. Let's do it. And so we walked out, and we had a bigger senior class than those guys. And I think that was the first defining moment in terms of the outcome of the ball game.
Buddy, when you think about that game, I got to get you to talk about Connie Frederick a little bit. Did you guys know he was going to fake the punt?
I was kind of like Lee. My claim to fame, I was the holder for field goals and extra points. And so anytime we'd get to the 50-yard line, we had a kicker by the name of Rat Riley, and he had just an unbelievable range. And he had already kicked, as the guys remember, 3 or 4 well over 50 yards and had a 57-yard and a 54-yard. So if we got the 50-yard line, you know, I'd be over there. I was like David and those guys trying to get some water, but I always had to go up and stand next to Coach Jordan because he'd send that field goal team in there. So, you know, I was standing up there, and Connie was standing up there, and he was in Coach Lorendo's ear. And you got to realize, there's a lot of folks in this room that know Coach Lorendo, and Coach Lorendo's not somebody's ear you really want to get into, but he loved Connie. He absolutely loved him. And he had been on Coach Lorendo for about 4 straight series saying, Coach, they're not rushing me at all. They're not rushing me at all. We can run for a first down. I'm sitting there saying, God, you crazy, man. I mean, I can't even believe you keep on like this. And this was about the 4th time, and finally, you know, we had a little lead there, and finally he said something to Coach Lorendo, and Coach Lorendo looked around at him, and he said, you better make a first down. And that's all he said to him. And Connie went out there, and the rest was history. And I guess all of us in this room have seen that replay many times. But it was the most amazing thing in the world because it was like a comedy. Because in the old days, as Coach Dooley and Coach Dye, remember, we always did that rollback and set up the wall. Connie was running behind Alabama's wall. And they all had their back turned setting up the wall for their punt returner, and Connie was running over behind them, and they all had their back turned to him. And there was not but one soul besides all the Auburn folks and the Alabama folks in the stands that knew he was running for a touchdown, and that was the punt returner. And bless his heart, Ronnie Ross blocked him right at the end and let Connie score. But he'd been on Coach Lorendo. Coach Jordan would have never let him do it.
He caught the snap inside the 5, didn't he? He ran almost 100 yards.
Actually, he caught it on 1 yard line, wasn't it, Pat?
84 yards.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they did it from the line of scrimmage, but I think he actually ran when he fielded the punt, because we were on about the 15, 16-yard line, so he ran it from about the 1 or 2 yard line. But you know, there's a lot of guys in here that knew him. Connie Frederick was a great athlete. I mean, he was a tremendous athlete. I take nothing away from Terry, but let me tell you something. Pat Sullivan had some great receivers. Mid 6, 8 games into that season, there probably weren't 3 catches and 30 yards difference between Connie Frederick and Terry Beasley. I mean, Connie was a tremendous wide receiver and great athlete, great punter. But I got to tell this quick story about Pat. I forgot. I guess I was a sophomore, and Coach Rendo, I loved him to death. He'd always come in the mess hall, and he'd eat with us. Most of the coaches didn't eat with us, but Coach Rendo always came in to eat with us, and he'd come in there, and we were in winter workouts, and he was talking about this hot shot quarterback he was recruiting out of Birmingham, John Carroll, and he was just saying, all y'all got to do is just hang on a little longer. I got you some help coming. We were so tired of hearing about Pat Sullivan before he got there. Because Coach Sorrento absolutely loved this kid. And so Pat comes in as a freshman, and it didn't take any of us guys that had been around very long to figure out he was worth waiting for. And I give a lot of credit to that freshman team, because we'd been close. And as Mike knows, we had a great defense. I mean, we played Alabama. I know Coach Diamond, we played Alabama in '67 off their feet. It was a torrential rainstorm, and we kicked them right in the butt. And it was a war, because they had a great defense too.
Were you
and
playing
excuse me?
Were you playing in '67?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Unfortunately, that was back in the days I was talking to Mark. That was back in the days when you could still crack back. And y'all's wide receiver cracked back on me, because I was about from Coach Dooley to where I'm sitting right now, from tackling Ken Stabler, and the wide receiver cracked back and cut me down, and Ken Stabler turned up that sideline, and Jimmy Carter chased him for 50 yards and couldn't catch him. But that was a 7-3 ball game, and that's when I think Mike and all our guys and David Campbell and all the guys realized we could play with Alabama. And then next year was only a touchdown difference, and then when Pat came in and all those guys came in, we knew when we went out on that field, and I'll never forget, I'm so glad Mike brought that up, we had always been so jealous that Coach Bryant let those seniors go out there. And when Mike called Coach Jordan into letting us go out there, I'm telling you, it was electrifying. I mean, we were standing out on that field, and my favorite picture from my college career is a picture from behind of all of those seniors standing out there on that football field at the coin toss.
Did Gus, you out get clipped on that? He claimed he got clipped on that play.
He got held, but
he got tackled.
let me say this. That was one of those games where it was a one-play difference. It could have gone either way, and both teams played great ball games. And Ken Stabler was a great athlete, and he made the play at the time he needed to make it. But I've never played in weather conditions like that. I don't know if anybody ever played any worse, but it was awful that day.
You remember the field was terrible the first half.
It was pine straw, Coach. You remember they put pine straw down.
What really screwed it up is they let the bands come on the field at halftime, and they just made it twice as bad as it already was.
Guys, y'all, and I know Tommy and Ken will remember this, but Legion Field, they played so many games at Legion Field that by the time Alabama-Auburn game came, it was a quagmire. So, Terry, they'd go out there and put pine straw down and paint it green. And so you'd be walking in your cleats, Q, and you look like Bigfoot out there. You'd have so much stuff. And then you had that torrential rainstorm, and it was a disaster. I mean, a good play that day was a 2 or 3 yard run, Terry. It was unbelievable.
Before y'all get away from that '69 team, y'all had another milestone game early in the year against Florida that really kind of put that team on the map. That was the 9-interception game.
Well, we had a lot of pride because we felt like we had the best quarterback in the conference in Pat, and there was a boy named John Reeves that it was getting all kinds of publicity, and he was going to be he was only a sophomore, and he was getting all kinds of Heisman Trophy talk as a sophomore, and they were undefeated, and they had this absolutely phenomenal passing combination of Reeves to Alvarez. And we faced every day, and I tell people this today, when they talk about, you know, some of the accomplishments that Larry Willingham and Don Webb and David and Johnny Simmons and Dave Beck, all of us, we were able to do a lot of things because we faced every day in practice the best passing combination anybody had ever seen.
Absolutely. And
that was Pat Sullivan and Terry Beasley. And let me tell you something, when you played that all week long, hell, Saturday was a cakewalk. Man, we couldn't wait to get out there. So when we got to Alvarez and Reeves, we had a game plan down, and it was a wonderful plan. I give Brother Oliver and Coach Davis all the credit for it. They came up with it, but they played like pros, and it was all timing routes. And we'd watched enough film to realize that the ball was in the air, and Alvarez would still be making 3 moves. And so we realized that it was all about timing. It was not he never looked back at the ball. When he turned and made his last cut, Coach, the ball was there. So Brother Oliver figured that out, and Coach Davis figured that out. And so we had a scheme, had Larry Willingham on one side of me, who was a phenomenal All-American defensive back, and Don Webb on the other side, who didn't get half the credit he deserved. He was a phenomenal defensive back, and all I had to do is stay in the middle and not screw up. And we would go up and fake like we were running a man-to-man. And Mike and Sonny Ferguson, they would move over to the tight end and make it look like they were covering them man-to-man. And they never knew if we were playing a man defense or a zone defense, and all we were doing is calling out numbers and calls, and they never figured it out. And Larry Willingham would walk up on the line of scrimmage and play Alvarez, and he thought he was in man-to-man, and he'd make those 2 or 3 quick moves and be gone. And Reeves would let the ball go. I mean, he'd let the ball go. He hadn't thought about looking where Sonny Ferguson was, who ended up with 3 or 4 interceptions that day. He hadn't thought about looking where Mike was. They were all about timing, and I think we got 9 that day, and it may still be a record, NCAA record. It was a great day, but it was just all about being well coached and well prepared, and I think we clearly established at the end of that day who the best passing combination was in the SEC.
But you had the Gators number 3 years in a row.
Well, there's a little side note to that too, in that as freshmen, the only game we lost was in Gainesville, and our freshman coach, one of our freshman coaches at that time was Tom Jones, who was Buddy's high school coach, and he came back and he told Coach Rendo that Reeves and Alvarez were better than Terry and I. Well, Coach Rendo, obviously, you know, that's all he talked to Terry and I about, and, you know, just kind of needling. So there was a little extra, you know, urgency when we played Florida. And, you know, we beat them as sophomores, and then junior year was probably the finest offensive game we ever played. We go down there, and it's their homecoming, and we beat them like 63-7, something like that. And, I mean, we scored the first 4, 5, 6 times we had it. And Terry had a great game, and James Owens ran a punt back. But, you know, Buddy, and hearing all the different people talk about building teams, and you talk about passing combinations, and Coach Jordan, Kenny, and I was telling somebody last night, is we've all thought about quitting and talking to Mike, but after our freshman year, that spring practice, that's when Coach Jordan was going to put a bottom in us. And if you'll remember, we ran the veer and the wishbone, and we didn't throw it maybe 5 or 6 times a practice. And you had the great defense with David and Vince Bolin and Mike and Strickland and Ron Yarborough as linebackers. And, you know, they just beat Tommy Traylor and I to death. And I remember calling home telling Daddy, I said, I'm thinking about, you know, coming home, as we've all done. And he said, boy, he said, you better think about it. And he said, you better go talk to Gene. And he said, because if you come home, you're not going back. And, of course, that was just a weak moment. And I'm glad. I remember Henley coming over and sitting on our porch one day when he was thinking about going home. And, but
God, why didn't y'all tell him?
Listen, I remember driving that 440. I went over and told Pat I'm quitting. I'm going. They not treating me good. I'd drive that 442 to Oxford. I called Frank Nelson there in Oxford when I got to city limits. He says, what are you doing calling here? Where are you? I said, well, I'm quitting. I'm here, I'm quitting. And he said, boy, you're not welcome here. You better turn that 442 around, head it back to Auburn, you know. And the next day we leave to go to Clemson. And, of course, things turned out well.
Well, the way they usually went up there, they'd make up their mind he's going to quit after practice. But they're too tired to that night, so I'll wait and do it in the morning. Then they'd say, well, maybe one more day. And then they'd be sure of it quick as practice over, but they were too tired at the end of practice to quit. And in the 63 game in Florida that you're speaking of there, you didn't play any of the second half, did you?
Played one series.
Okay. That's, they kept them out of the ball game so much until we near about lost our conditioning because of trying to play a lot of people. And the first team, which meant something then, making first team was a great thing. Then, to be number one, you could hear Coach, and I know Coach Dye's done it, he say, give me number one, and I don't mind, just like a lightning struck. They're ready to go for that number one. And another great thing that we don't have this day that was in those days was the travel uniform. You know, we had travel jackets, slacks, tie, and it was great pride to get one of those travel suits. That's where it started. And it was a great pride for people to wear those travel suits now. And I hate it so bad that we don't have that now because it is a loss in pride.
Kenny, I don't know how pretty you look in a light blue jacket and navy pants with orange socks. I remember those Gold Cup orange socks. I remember nobody wanted to wear those orange socks, and Poo-Poo Pruitt, he wore them for 4 years. Everybody gave them to him. He wore them.
But Terry, I know you was interested in the looks of maybe white shoes and the way that you looked out there, but I remember one afternoon.
And that white belt to go with them shoes.
And I remember one day in spring practice before the '72 season where that got to where it wasn't important. Coach, Coach Jordan would he'd wind up practice with from the 5-yard end scrimmage, full tilt, and 30-something times Terry got to carry the ball in a row. His number got called. And Terry kind of lost his breath and found out that football was really important. So he became a football player that day. A hell of a football player. And it'll do it to you, won't you?
But I wanted to wear those white shoes.
Did you wear them?
I'm going to tell you in a minute. I'll tell you the white shoe story in a little while.
What was that, Tom?
Pat and I were talking about Jimmy Spigner, who was a colorful player back in those days. Had a story that day.
Well,
part of the game.
It was kind of like David talking when he was talking about the Alabama player. Florida had probably one of their greatest defensive players of all time, Jack Youngblood, and Jimmy, or Snakes as he was called because he had snakes in his head. But Jimmy was giving Youngblood all he could handle. Well, Jimmy didn't have to line up on him. Ross did. And so, you know, back then the quarterbacks called the plays. Ross come back and Youngblood was on our right side. I'd call right twins or something to put the tight end to the right. You know, just.
Well, the thing about it, he's saying this looking through his ear hole.
And we'd run a play and we'd come back and on purpose, I'd call again right pro or something, put Ross over on Youngblood. And he cussed me, and the Snakes were just giving Youngblood, and they were just going at each other. And Ross coming back looking through his ear hole about every play. But it was something. But to kind of finish up the Alabama series when we were playing, probably the finest job I think Coach Jordan ever did coaching was our junior year, and it goes back to our freshman. And that we had lost Bobby Strickland against Mississippi State, and so we come to play Georgia, and they had the two big running backs, Leak and somebody else, I forget, Coach. And you come over to our place, and Coach Jordan's dream was to go to the Sugar Bowl. And if we beat Georgia, we get an invitation to the Sugar Bowl. Well, Georgia comes over and beats us, and we have a week off between Alabama and Georgia. And, you know, always you'd go check in the dining hall on Monday, and then you would be off Monday and Tuesday and start back your preparation on Wednesday. Well, I remember going over the dining hall on Monday. Coach Freeman was a quarterback coach, said, we'll meet, you know, right after lunch. So we go out there, and he draws up two plays, a dive and an option. And, you know, I've been a little smart aleck. I said, yeah. I said, I guess we're going to use those against Alabama. He said, no. He said, Coach Jordan wants to find out who wants to play Alabama. He said, be dressed in full gear on the AstroTurf at 3:30. Well, we go out there. We stretch, do our calisthenics. Coach Jordan calls up one-on-one. And he, you know, he never did this. But as Kenny would know, he'd get that left hand going. He called dive right. I don't remember Terry whatever, and then option. I remember Coach Davis was in the back of the back, and he was talking to one of the secondary guys. And Coach Jordan wheeled around and jumped him. And I mean, when he did that, about the second play in the scrimmage, well, long story short, we scrimmed. That's all we did was scrimmage that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I mean, we were down. We were losing them left and right. And we're even in pads. We finally, about Monday of that week, the game week, we start our game plan. And we're even out in pads on Thursday, and we lose Danny Spikeman, who tore his knee up, and he was our starting all-conference guard. And I remember Jerry Colley, who that tight end, he had to go in and start at tackle against Alabama. And they come out, and they're just drowning us. It's 17-0 at the end of the first quarter. In fact, David Bailey, I believe, leaves and headed to the dressing room. And Terry was hurt, and anyway, we were fortunate enough to come back. And you mentioned Ronnie Ross. He made a great interception. He had moved from tight end to linebacker to start. Tommy Yearout had moved from starting offensive guard to a linebacker, and James Owens had moved from a running back to a linebacker. And all three of them started against Alabama in a week's time. And Ross makes a great interception right before half, and we get 10 to come back. And, you know, it's a scoring fest towards the end, and we're fortunate to win that one. And then, you know, then we lose our senior year, but we'd won 3. But I won't ever forget, you know, Coach Jordan on that. I remember talking to you, as I always did on Friday night. We'd go to the movie, and, you know, I was superstitious. And when we get back as we get off the bus, I'd go over to Kenny, and I said, well, what do you think? He said, I don't know, but we'll know this time tomorrow. And so.
One of the great games that was a shame it wasn't on television was your senior year over in Athens.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say.
And I want to get both of your takes on that.
The 70 game, which was a big upset, but then the 71 game, which was played in Athens, and Georgia was undefeated, and y'all came in, and that game was the game that enabled you to win the Heisman Trophy, because you had a Heisman Trophy day. I still have some Georgia people who thinks that we don't try quite as hard against Auburn. I've been accused of that on some occasions.
And we were undefeated also. Both of us were undefeated.
Yeah, it was an incredible scene for a ball game. And as you often look back on if you had an opportunity to do things over, how would you do it? Particularly that was one, because you didn't feel like, well, maybe we lost and they didn't do a good job. But there was so much excitement around the campus on Monday and Tuesday. And our team, I really think that I should have just stopped practice on Tuesday. They were just wild, too wild. And maybe we left it out there on the practice field as I look back on it. But the main reason is because Pat had such a great day, and Sullivan Beasley had such a great day.
Let me say something about that game. I remember it so vividly. And I had 2 friends come by my house on that Saturday. Jim McClurkin played tackle for us, and Sam McClurkin, his brother, they were going to Montgomery. Sam was a captain of one of the Auburn teams. And we sat there, and we had lunch, a sandwich or something. The game was fixing to come on. And boy, we just had a time of our lives there. And I remember so vividly, not only Pat and Terry, but there was Smarts, there was Dressler.
Well, we had Terry, and we had Sandy Cannon, we had Dick Smokes,
Smalls
And
was amazing.
Smalls had a great game.
Yeah, and there was pressure on Pat. He threw some balls fading away, you know, like this, and it was a Heisman Trophy day.
Well, Coach, first let me say that I appreciate all your comments after that, because I'm sure that carried a long way as far as winning. But I think the thing that, you know, and I've said this many times, is there's two atmospheres I've been in all the times I've been fortunate. And pre-TV, that atmosphere at Georgia there, I mean, there was none to compare. I mean, they were in the trussels, they were in the trees, they were, you know, everywhere. And it actually started on Friday. And I don't know, I'm sure you've heard this story, but about 30 miles outside of town, we're on the bus, and I was always on the second bus playing Jeopardy. But anyway, the students met us. And, of course, they were having libation, as somebody called it.
Yeah, all week long.
Yeah. But it was probably 40 or 50 cars. It was, you know, caravan, and you know, they started circling our buses and passing us and throwing cans. Well, I mean, you could just hear a hush come over the bus. I mean, there was a quietness. And, you know, back then we stayed downtown at the old Holiday Inn right next to Fraternity Row, where we go to practice and then come back to the Holiday Inn. And all night long, you know, the students jumping off the fraternity houses, running across the Holiday Inn, keep us up. But, you know, it was such a electrifying atmosphere to go in, and y'all had, I think y'all had a great football team, undefeated, and we were. But we got out early, and then you came back, and then Roger Mitchell did block an extra point, and then Terry caught one, and I forget who hit him. He bounced off and went about 70 to score. But Dick had a great game, and then you know, one other thing, if I may, that you mentioned the Heisman, and one of the great memories that I had, and I've heard Coach Dye talk about it, is people that make the difference. And I know that why I got this ring and the trophy is because of my teammates and coaches, and, you know, being at the right place at the right time. But one of the special things that happened to Gene and I and our family was the Heisman back then was announced on TV, and it wasn't a deal where you were, you know, up in New York. We were in Auburn, and it was on Thursday night, the Georgia Tech game, when it was announced. And our TV had gone on the blink, and we had gone over to the heart of Auburn and got a room and watched it. And then after it was over, we went to the Coliseum and I got to share it with all the teammates, coach. And, you know, that's what I remember.
John Heisman coached at Auburn. I think he had about 3 or 4 years, and then went to Georgia Tech and had a great career there, and had a 32 wins, no losses, and eventually left and went to Pennsylvania and then somewhere else, and wound up at Rice University. Now, what I would like to know, if anybody knows, what part did John Heisman have in bringing about the Heisman Trophy? John Heisman was quite an innovator. He had some innovation. He developed, or it happened that North Carolina and Georgia were playing in Atlanta, and he went to the game, and at a certain time, it was time for Georgia to punt, and North Carolina man came in and rushed him, and the man, instead of punting, he took the ball and threw it as far as he could, and the official gave it a touchdown, which was illegal at that time. And after that, John Heisman politicked for the forward pass, and about 1906, I think it was approved as a forward pass. And does anybody know what part did John Heisman play in naming the trophy?
I should know, Nick, and I don't.
If I had won it, I would know, but I
Guys, let me tell you something. Mike Colon knows this, and all these guys that played with Pat, you have a chance once in your life to meet a great person, a great leader, and I've met a bunch of people. But I'm going to tell you something. Every day that Pat Sullivan was sick, I prayed for him, and every day that I thank God that I met somebody like Pat Sullivan. I tell you guys, if you never had the opportunity to be around him and play for him, every day he walks the walk and talks the talk too. But he's the real deal, guys. You should have been able to have a chance to play with him.
I'd like to say, and I think Bill and I may be the only guys that walked on at Auburn in here. I don't know a lot of you guys. But anyway, nobody came. Auburn didn't choose me. I chose Auburn. And I chose Auburn because I went to John Carroll, and every year at John Carroll, we had somebody go to Auburn and play football. And they not only just played, they did very, very well. Pat, Shelby, Schmaltz, Tom Banks, guys like that. And then I used to listen. I was telling Mike, I used to listen to Mike Cole and those guys on the radio and stuff. And I had this idea in my head that I was going to be the first black guy to play for Bear Bryant. That was my goal as I was growing up. And, but I went to Auburn as a senior and visited Auburn. I visited Alabama with some guys. And there is always, I think there's something very, very special about Auburn and the people. And you just listen to these guys and you're talking about Pat, you're talking about, and the humbleness that comes from the guys in this room. And I think it's just a very, very special. We've all been very, very fortunate. Bill and I talked about being walk-ons and then being fortunate enough to get scholarships and what that meant to us in our lives and what it meant to our parents and so on and so forth. But I think we're all very, very blessed to be here, to have had this experience. I was flying to Los Angeles, and I got off the plane. Whenever somebody calls me Thomas now, I know it's from college. And they say, this guy said, hey, Thomas. And I turned around, and he said, I'm an Auburn guy. I said, oh, great, man, good to see you. This is like 2 or 3 months ago. It's like 30 years after I played the last football game at Auburn. And this guy said, he said, you know, remember the first time you played Tennessee and Auburn, 1974? I said, yeah, 1974. We beat them 21-0. He said, well, I was at that game. I said, well, that's great, man. He said, I was 10 years old. And I said, wow, you know, you remember the game and everything? He said, yeah. And he said, but you gave me your chin strap after the game. He said, and I still got it. And man, I honest to God didn't know what to say to the guy. I just stood there. I said, thank you. I didn't know what to say. And I think that's the specialness that we all have, and that's I hear coming out today. And I'm just glad to be a part of it, man. And to have had the Pats and the Mike Colins and the buddies and the guys to listen to on the radio and say, you know what, I think I want to be a part of that one day, and to be able to do it. So
that's football. Vince, I want to ease your conscience too. Don't feel that you didn't prepare well in that ball game over there at Georgia. We could have played for a week and you couldn't have beat us. But, your band, Georgia's band, beat you. You know,
band. Well, I've been
band.
trying to figure it out. And
Tell you
the trainer told me who won.
At least I let you off the hook, Ben. We came out to get dressed for the ball game, and as you know, then you parked up on the street there, and there's big wide steps, about as wide as from here to the wall, that you come down to get to the dressing room to dress. Well, we got out there to that, and the band was in their pregame warm-ups or something out there on the field. We got off the buses, and before we could walk down those steps, they had come there, and we had to go down that big, wide, expanse of steps, single file, because they were right there, right in the ear, this close, hollering dog food, dog food, dog food, right in everybody's ear. I think Pat will agree.
I thought you was going to tell us they hit one of them with a tuba.
And that has something to do with it, the psychology of it, but you got worked on by your own band.
Mike and I were talking on the way up, which I think is a tribute to Coach Dooley and obviously Coach Dye as well. But when we were in school, 66 through 70, and then Pat and Terry and the other guys a little bit later, Georgia was an equal rival to us as Alabama was. And people outside this room don't know that, but Alabama was special, and they will always be special. But I'm going to tell you right now, the biggest games to me always were Georgia. Georgia Tech had lost a little of its luster at that time. We still had the Rec Tech parade. But we had, you guys remember, we had as many kids on that football team from Georgia as we did from the state of Alabama. And, of course, having my friend here, Coach Dooley over there, being an old Auburn man, we wanted to beat Georgia just as bad as we ever wanted to beat Alabama. And it was a great rivalry, but I can tell you unequivocally, and I'm not saying it because Coach Dooley's here, it was a great friendly rivalry. There was so much respect. There was no name calling. It was a great game, and the camaraderie of the players afterwards and over the years was super. And Mike went on and played for many years at Miami with several of your boys, Jake Scott and Bill Stanfield and those guys. And it was just a different
Jake
rivalry.
and Bill, the same kind of guys Mike is too.
Just different kind of rivalry. Alabama's was.
Did you get an amen on that?
Alabama's was a nasty rivalry. You guys agree? Alabama's was nasty.
I like to add
They're
to
the
that,
dearest
too.
guys to me in the world. You better believe it.
Even before that, back when I played, Pat and I played in the high school all-star game together in 1956. And we played against one another 4 years in college. And I would rather beat Georgia than Alabama any day of the week. Those were my people over there. I grew up with them. I fought with them. And that was the game for me every year.
And there were so many Georgia kids on the, because of the proximity to the state line.
Well, let me cut to the chase. There ain't nothing like that Alabama game. I tell you Georgia guys can talk that forever. There ain't nothing like that one.
I agree with you. Now, I understand, and I understood, and I was smart and knew enough about football in the Southeastern Conference. If you're going to coach at Auburn, you got to win Georgia and Alabama. You don't have to win every year, but you damn sure don't want to get embarrassed by them. And you better win your share if you're going to stay the coach at Auburn.
You definitely can't lose.
Georgia is special, and I agree with you, Ken. There's something special about it. But if you coach it out at Auburn, whip Alabama's ass. That'll keep you.
He mentioned the 60
job. That'll keep your job.
I want you to address something. We were talking about special games and the atmosphere around that Georgia-Auburn game and electricity. And I've, as an official, have worked 3 national championship games where there's really a lot of electricity and some special things going on. But the most special, most electrifying thing I've ever been around was when we brought Alabama to Auburn. You were coach. You made that happen. I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit because that was so special. And it's still, I get chills thinking about it that day.
Coach Dooley and you realize that back in Auburn tradition, just like you said, you played them in Atlanta, you played Tech in Atlanta, you played Tennessee in Birmingham, you played Alabama in Birmingham, you played Georgia in Florida was the only big school coming to Auburn to play. Well, Coach Beard and Coach Jordan and Lee Haley, whoever got started working on getting the teams come to, and I tell you something else that people don't realize that I think plays a big and very, very important part in Auburn football history is that it probably wasn't by design, but the way it happened. A lot of people made fun of Coach Jordan talking about AstroTurf. Everybody was going to AstroTurf. Everybody wanted AstroTurf. They put it up in the field in Birmingham. Well, Alabama was playing their biggest games in Birmingham. They played Tennessee, LSU, Auburn, Georgia Tech or whoever, the big games, they played in Birmingham. And the reason they did is, and Coach Brown being a businessman, it was a bigger stadium, sold more tickets. But a big part of it was that there wasn't many students went to Birmingham, and he could sell all them student tickets for regular price and make more money for football. But anyway, that's the way it is, and they would play the Southern Mississippi's and Southwest Louisiana's and whoever in Tuscaloosa. And that's the reason they have a problem winning in Tuscaloosa right now. In my opinion, is they don't have a tradition of playing big games in Tuscaloosa. They played them in Birmingham. But Coach Jordan pulling those games out of Birmingham and Stan said, look, we're going to made it important to build a stadium in Auburn. So while they set up there with a small stadium in Tuscaloosa, going to 70,000 seats in Birmingham, Auburn was trying to match up Birmingham, match our stadium so we had something equal to Birmingham to bring that game to Auburn. So we ended up, when I got to Auburn, with 72,000 seats, and in a couple of years we went to 85. But we had to end up with a much better facility than they got in Tuscaloosa because of Coach Jordan's vision of somebody's back there of, building that facility on campus. But anyway, the first thing, Coach Brown don't ever think he wasn't smart. First thing he said to me when I saw him after I got to Auburn, he said, well, I guess you want to take that game to Auburn. I said, we're going to take it to Auburn. He said, well, not long as I'm coaching. I said, well, you ain't going to be coaching forever. He said, well, we got a contract through 88. I said, we play 89 in Auburn then. And of course, he didn't last that long, but I mean, it was a no-brainer. I mean,
if he had lasted, Pat, would he come? Would have?
Well, hell, yes, he'd have come. I mean, Perkins was stupid enough to say we were going to play him. Well, now, how in the hell are you going to coach at Alabama and not play Auburn? I mean, that's a conference. We in the conference. They got
Bobby Dodd said the same thing.
Well,
Jeff Beard slapped his hand and brought them to Auburn. My sophomore year, junior year.
I mean, that was.
They brought and so.
But we've got a facility.
So
we got a facility at Auburn right now that will accommodate Georgia and Alabama and all these other folks. And I think Coach Jordan's had a lot to do with that. His mindset of bringing those games at home rather than, following the Great Bear to Birmingham trying to play them football games. And now it's been extremely beneficial to Auburn and to Alabama playing that game home and home. Because, see, playing Alabama and Auburn every other year assures Auburn of selling out of season tickets every year. They're not going to give them up when we have to go to Tuscaloosa because they lose their priority for the next year. So they're going to sell out a season ticket. And if we want to go to 100,000 seats in Auburn, don't worry about it. Let's go on to 100,000 because they will sell out because we could sell 200,000 tickets to the Auburn, Alabama game. And that has had a tremendous impact on the financial part of our athletic department at Auburn. Not only in season ticket sales, but in fundraising with the GAF, scholarships, the suites, the whole thing. And bringing Alabama, it was the right thing to do, and it was not, and the trustees made it happen. I mean, you can say, I just happened to be the coach here. And if Alabama could have stopped it politically, they would have, but they couldn't. And
Coach, the end results of that was you catching some flack, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but that don't make any difference. I mean,
and not from Auburn people, but I mean, that has a lot to do with Mayor Arrington and his connection with all the...
Yeah, I mean, that's all. I mean, that's all part of life. But it's that right now, we've got a great facility there. And a lot of you guys, the ones, everybody here had a part in it. Whether you played 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or played in the last 5 years.
I bet that expansion of the stadium was one of the reasons Coach Jordan wanted to be on the board of trustees.
Well, see, it was already it was already done. The 72,000 was already here, right. But I'm gonna say the biggest day in my tenure at Auburn. And the day I walked in there on Monday after we lost to Alabama up in Birmingham in '84, I mean, you talking about sick. We had a better football team than they did, and we lost, and I mean, it just ripped my guts out. I had the dang hives and didn't sleep all weekend. I walked in, I had a board of trustees meeting on Monday, and they voted unanimously to go to 85,000 seats and build them 69 skyboxes. I mean, I was cured. I said, you know, and I didn't get fired. I said, these folks, when they did that, I said, they're really serious about having a football program here. And, I mean, that was in '84. '87, we opened the season with Texas there on national television.
What was the score in that Alabama game, the Alabama-Auburn game? Was it 20-7 or something like that?
No, it's 17-14.
Yeah,
We could have tied it with a field goal.
Yeah, right. 17-14.
No, we could have won it with a field goal.
17-16. I mean, 14-16.
That's the Van Halen kick, wasn't it?
14-16.
Robert McGinty.
I believe it was because I remember.
Yeah. He missed the field goal there.
Yeah, Robert McGinty missed it, but you know, I didn't realize. I tried to forget about it.
No, it was 15-17. That's right. 15-17.
15-17.
That's what it was. It's 15-17.
Coach, tell us about what I've always thought was one of the greatest Auburn victories, and especially with Al here, was the Sugar Bowl game against Michigan. Because that to me was one of the two great coaches and two great wills.
Well, it was one great coach and one trying to get there. One thing about Al is that, you know, he was a coach's dream as a kicker, because I mean, he was a team player and always ready, and was, you know, he wanted the game on the line. You know, that was what he dreamed about, was to being in that situation to where he could win a football game. Because kicker, a lot of times, you know, he goes out there and kicks in the game, and sometimes it's insignificant. You win by a big enough margin, or you lose by a big enough margin to where he's just out there, you know, 4 or 5 plays kicking. But you know, Michigan had a good football team, and they had lost a game or two or whatever it was, but I was a big fan of Coach Schembechler, just like I was a fan of Coach Douglas, and you study these people that are successful, and I studied him, and not only studied what they do, you know, football-wise, you studied just like Vince said earlier, how they handle themselves and conduct themselves. Now, I didn't throw as many fits as Bo did, but I liked the fact that his players loved him and cared about him, and I know he worked their ass off, and that was but fundamentally, you know, it looked like to me that they always played hard, and it was good fundamental football teams, and always well prepared, and I really got a big kick out of playing against Michigan. And I knew we had a better football team when we went down there. And I doubt, and I don't even know, I doubt if we beat the line that day. You know, we won 9-7.
Yeah.
And we probably were favored 3 or 4 points. I don't know what it was in the ball game, but you know, they were just a good, hard-nosed, typical Michigan football team, and Randy probably can tell you more about it than I can, but we hung in there and fought and scratched, and I mean, hell, we had a hard time. We made a few first downs, but we couldn't score, and
Randy had a big game there. He just
hell no, he just had a good drive. He won the game at the end with a good drive. We done struggled our ass off all day. We threw about 2 passes in the first half and got one of them intercepted or something and shut it down. And we didn't throw the ball no more the rest of the game. But at the end of the game, when it counted, yes, he did. He took us down the field. We drove down and kicked the field goal and won it.
Al, did you get any special coaching that day at the end of that game?
Listen, nobody said a damn word to the kickers ever on Saturday. And nobody said we don't let nobody coach them in practice, and we damn sure didn't coach them on game day. All they did is you go and kick it. Now, Al got me in trouble in Atlanta one time.
The Georgia Tech game?
Yes, he did. But going back to that, I'll tell that's another story. The Michigan game came down to kicking the field goal at the end. And Mike Mann was our third string quarterback. And a little bit, you know, he would do some strange things sometimes. and the only thing I was worried about, I wasn't worried about Al making the field goal. I was worried about what Mike might do holding the snap. Okay, but he's a good kid, and that's the way he can contribute, was hold the ball, and he's a pretty good holder. But I wouldn't be surprised if he'd have jerked it up off the ground and tried to run it in the end zone for a touchdown. I mean, and that's what I was afraid of. And I told Mike, you love these kids to death. I said, Mike, damn. He said, Coach, I thought about running it in. I said, I knew damn well you did.
I want to go back to the ticket sales. You know what I mean? All the tickets. You're talking about expansion of the stadium, and Pat and I talked on this a little bit. Of course, I was a ticket mongrel, buddy. I mean, you talking about selling tickets. Now, I would sell those tickets.
That's when you could scalp them.
You got that right. And I was a ticket-broken fool. And we getting ready in the 72 game to play the Alabama in Allegiant Field. And I end up, if you will notice, in the north end of the end zone, there's XXYYZZ. There were those wooden temporary bleachers that were at the end of the field. Well, I had every one of those seats. I had every ticket, and people would call me and they say, I understand you got some tickets. I say, 50-yard line, send me $100, I'll send you, the tickets. And see, XXYYZZ wasn't on the back of the ticket because it was a temporary. So, somebody call and say X. I say, oh, they're 50-yard liners. You just go on up there. You don't have to worry about it. You can find that. I mean, that's luxury seats, So before the games, we pull up on the bus and the players go out and walk around on the field, a little bit. I used to sit in the dressing room there and try to find my name in the program. But anyway, some of the guys went out on the field and they come back in the dressing room and they said, Terry, there's some people already in this end zone down here, screaming for you. I said, Alabama fans? He said, no, they're our people, and they're not using good language, Well, I always used to like to run out on the field with my helmet, carry my helmet, and let my hair blow, and this day I put that helmet on, and I got in between all of us, and they were screaming, where are you? Where's that long-haired son of a gun? Put us down here in this end zone. There you are, and screaming at me. Well, of course, if you know anything about the Alabama-Auburn game, all the 17 to 16 points, all the game was played on that end of the field. All the points were scored in the north end zone. People coming up after me after the game say, man, those are the greatest seats I ever had, man. 50-yard liners.
We played Georgia Tech in Atlanta in '83, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we were behind at halftime, 13-7. And I heard Georgia players talking about Coach Dooley having a couple of fits yesterday, and we had one of those fits in the dressing room at halftime. And I don't think Georgia Tech made a first down in the second half. And we get it, it's 28 to 13, I think. I do remember they kicked off to us, and Bo fumbled the first play from center. First snap. And they got the ball on about a 35-yard line, somewhere in there, and then they punted to us from that 45. I mean, they run 3 plays and lost 20 yards. But anyway, it came down to the end of the game, and we had run the clock down to, 30 seconds, so whatever it was, I don't know, it was right down at the end of the game. And Al's standing on the sideline, it's 4th down. And I don't want to line up and punt, because Al said, Coach said, let me go in there and kick this. Said, I haven't kicked a field goal in all day, and had 2 or 3 games. How many games?
3 games.
He said, I haven't kicked a field goal in 3 games. I said, go ahead. So he goes out there with 30 seconds left to go in the game and kicks a field goal. Well, the line on the game that made it 31 to 13.
31 to 14.
31 to 13. I think it was 31 to 13. Well, the line on the ball game was 17 or something like that. And Curry jumps me about running up score to beat the line because my kicker over here asked me to go in and kick a field goal. But headlines in the paper, now runs up score to beat the line. I said, Al, I said, you see what damn trouble you get in.
I wish I'd have been as smart as Terry and had something going back there.
Yeah.
That's right.
I wished, I'll tell you what, I wished I'd have known that putting houses on them punts, and we could have blocked a lot of punts.
Coach, you talk about Georgia Tech, and you talk about Bo fumbling. We need to put him in his place a little bit. When I guess my senior year, his junior year, we're over there. I had thrown an interception the first series, and Terry had fumbled two or three times, and Georgia Tech's ahead. So we make a little drive and get down to about the 5-yard line, and called a little option play, and or it was a fake dive and pop pass or something. Anyway, I faked it, and it was covered, so I just flipped it out there to Terry. We was carrying out his fake, wasn't paying attention. Well, it hits him and he fumbles, and so we going back over to the sideline, and boy, Coach Jordan and Coach Lorena, they are already out to, meet us about the end of the coaching box. I veer off, heading on over to midfield. And Terry said, "Where are you going?" I said, and they hollering at Terry, and well, you go ahead and finish.
I said, boy, we messed up, didn't we? He said, what's this wee crap, Kemosabe?
At that time, I veer on off to the 50, and they get him.
Boy, they meet me at the hash mark. I'm telling you, I've done fumbled three times in the first half. They accused me. Only 2 of them were mine. One of them was his, but I got blamed for it.
Amazing, isn't it? Hearing the legendary Auburn stories told by the legends themselves. Coming up, we'll hear how Auburn ranks in terms of all-time running backs.